Hello guys, this is part 112 of ASP.NET video series. In this video we will discuss about ASP.NET custom server control. In the ASP.NET video series, in part 104 to 111, we discussed about building ASP.NET user controls. If you have not watched those videos, I strongly encourage you to do so before continuing with this session. So, what's the type of control that we are going to build? Today. Come on. So what's the type of control that we are going to build today? The control looks something like this. Where is the control? Here it is. Something like this that you can see in the image here. It is going to contain this text box, image button, and the calendar. When the composite custom control, that is when this calendar control initially loads up on the page. The user should be able to see only the text box and the image button. The calendar should be invisible on the initial load. And then when the user clicks the image button, that is when the calendar should become visible. And then as soon as the user selects a date from the calendar, the selected date should be populated into the text box. And the calendar should become invisible. If you remember, in part 104 to 111, we have discussed about doing exactly the same thing. But as an user control, as an ASP.NET user control, in this session we will discuss about rebuilding the same control but an ASP.NET composite custom control. And in later video session we will talk about the differences between user control and composite custom control. In fact, that is a very important interview question. Let's see how to build this control. And another important thing to keep in mind is that when you are building on ASP.NET user control, we had a graphical designer to build the user interface of that user control. User control files have the extension of .ascx, and then if we want to build this interface graphically, all we did was drag and drop the text box, button, and calendar control onto that ascx file. But when we are building composite custom controls, you cannot build the user interface graphically like that, because there is no designer associated with composite custom control. So the user interface of a composite control, of a composite custom control has to be done completely in code. Okay, so let's see how to actually do that. Let's flip to Visual Studio. Let's flip to Visual Studio, guys. We will be using Visual Studio 2022. Where is the Visual Studio? Here it is. Run as administrator. So go to the Visual Studio 2022 and click at the create a new project. Now we will be creating a ASP.NET web application. Here it is, empty web application. Okay, click next and name our project custom control. So name it as custom control. And select the location. Our location would be the same: C drive, users, Dell, part 112, and then create. Click the create button. We will use empty project template, and it is going to create a project custom control for us. And then click the next create button. We have clicked it. Now what we need to do, we need to add a file to this project custom controls. Right click at it, add new item, click on web, and we need a class file. And the name of the class file, custom calendar. So server control, we need to, where is the server control? Here it is, web form server control, and we name it as custom control. So remove this web and control from here. Custom calendar, we will give it a name, custom calendar. Okay, custom calendar will be the name of our class file. And now what we will do, we will remove all this coding from here. and remove this default property tag. The code that we have removed was generated by Visual Studio, and we have got rid of that code. And I have also deleted the default property text. I have already removed that or deleted that. And then I am going to retain this toolbox, and then I am going to retain this toolbox data attribute. Now, if you don't understand the purpose of this toolbox data attribute at the moment, don't worry. We are going to talk about this in our next video session when we actually use this custom calendar control in an ASP.NET web application project. Okay, but for now, I am going to make a change to this text box data attribute. Instead of having the server control, I am going to call this actually custom calendar. It is already written custom calendar, so we need not to change anything here. I am going to do the same thing. Here we also have the ending custom calendar. Okay, now this attribute is actually used to render the default tag. When we drag and drop this composite custom control from the toolbox onto a web form, as I told you, if it is not clear at the moment, don't worry, we will be much clear when we discuss about using this composite custom control. Composite custom control in an ASP.NET web application project. Okay, so that's it. The first change we have done. We have changed this toolbox data attribute. We have not changed anything. It is pre-existing custom calendar attribute. It is the meaningful name already. And then look at the custom calendar is actually a class. And look at the custom calendar is actually a class. And the most important thing to keep in mind here is that this custom calendar is inheriting from web control. But remember, we are going to build composite custom control. So in ASP.NET, there is another class called composite control class. So I am going to make my custom calendar actually inherit from composite control class. Composite control class. So why are we doing this? Because this base class, the composite control base class, contains all the functionality that is required by any ASP.NET composite control. So it makes sense to make rather than we re-implementing all those features again, we can actually inherit from that class composite control and we get all those functions. Okay, for example, in a bit you will see what are the different functions that we are going to override to make this an ASP.NET composite custom control. Okay, so that is the first step making your class inherit from composite control base class. And then if you look at the calendar control, the custom calendar control, it has 3 child controls. If you look at the custom calendar control, if you look at the calendar control, the custom calendar control, it has 3 child controls. It has 3 child controls: the text box, the image button, and the calendar. So we need all these controls. So we need all these 3 controls as child controls. So we need those objects. So now if you remember, if it was user control, simply you drag and drop the control from the toolbox. Simply you drag and drop from the toolbox. Okay. If you remember, if it was user control, simply you drag and drop the control from the toolbox onto the ASCX file. But this is not a user control. This is a composite control, and these are created completely in code. So you can't really use a graphical designer. You have to do that in code, and we need these 3 child controls. Text box, image button, and calendar. So let me go ahead and have declaration for those 3 child controls. So copy those, and then so what we need to do, I need to write some code here. Text box. So copy those from Notepad. I am going to copy it from the Notepad. So where is my Notepad? Not this one. I have this one. And copy those code from here. So copy it from here and paste it into the custom calendar.cs file here. And then within my class, I am going to paste all that. I have copy and pasted it. So I need text box, image button, and calendar. Okay. Now the next important thing to do is, to create the child controls itself. So how do I create child controls? Okay. So this custom calendar control is going to contain all these 3 controls as child control. We have declaration for them, but we need to create these child controls. Okay, so to create child controls, we can actually override a method that is provided by this base class, composite control class. Okay, so as soon as I type override, and then when I press space, so as soon as I type override and space, and then when I press space, I can see all the method. I can see all the methods and properties that we can override. Okay, so I am going to override this method. So I am going to override this method, create child control. Okay. Okay, look at that. This create child control is actually coming from the control base class. So this create child control is actually coming from control base class. Okay, so where is control base class? Our class is inheriting from composite control. Our class custom calendar is inheriting from composite control class. It is not inheriting from the control class. But if you look at this composite control class, if I right click on that, say go to definition, if I right click on that and say go to definition, the composite class is inheriting from web control, and web control is actually inheriting from the control base class. So indirectly our custom calendar class is inheriting from the control base class. And if you look at the control base class, if I put cursor and right mouse button click, control base class, it has got this create child control. So if I press Control F, and find next, create child control, here it is, and find next. Create the child control that are going to be part of our custom control, Look at that, we have this create child control method. We have this create child control method defined as a virtual method in that base control class. In that base control class, now we need to override that method in order to create the child control. That are going to be part of our custom calendar. Okay, so type override. And then press space and then create child controls. Create means if create child control, it is going to build the method skeleton. If I press tab here, it is going to build the method skeleton for us automatically. Okay, so what are we going to do here? We are going to create child control. All we need to do here is clear another controls that may exist using control.clear property method, and then create an instance of text box image button, assign IDs, and then add those controls to the controls collections properties of this custom calendar control. Okay. And that is what this code is exactly doing here. And that is what this code is exactly doing here. Which code I am talking about? I am talking about those code. Where are the codes? My codes gone where? Okay, I have to type it of myself, of my own. Okay. Controls dot clear text box is the instance text box dot text. You need to assign ID to this text box ID. Date text box and the width text box width is equal to unit. Pixel 80 image button ID calendar image button ID calendar image button calendar instance create calendar ID calendar control custom calendar control this dot controls dot add this dot controls dot image button add image button and calendar. So what is the first line is here? So what is the first line here? The first line controls dot clear, and if you look at the IntelliSense, what it is doing? Removes all controls from the current server controls, control collection properties. So remove any other controls, and then what we are doing, we are creating an instance of text box, giving it an ID, and then setting the width of the text box to 80 pixel, and setting the text box width of the text box to 80 pixels, so that the text box is not too wide. I am limiting the width of the text box. So if you look at the width property, it is actually expecting a unit. Class, and then pixel static method, Okay, so here the width of the text box is 80 pixels, and similarly image button, we are assigning an ID for that. Calendar, assigning ID for that. And finally what we are doing, we are actually adding the child controls to custom calendar control, using the controls collection property, Similarly we are adding the image button, and the calendar, and adding the calendar. So that is the second step. Override create child control. Override a create child control method. Okay, this is one more to do. So all we have done until now is created these child controls. All we have done until now is created these child controls. We have created them by overriding the create child controls method. Now the next step is to actually render them. to the client, and to do that we have to override another method that is coming from the base class. Okay, so that is the render method. So again, if we type override, and then press space, Visual Studio show us all the method that we can override. So render, okay, so composite control class contain this render method, so the composite control class contain this render method. So I am going to override that. Press tab. Now it is going to generate the skeleton for us automatically. An important thing to keep in mind here is that it takes in HTML text writer, HTML text writer object, HTML text writer object as an input parameter, which is actually going to render these three, which is actually going to render these three control for us. All we need to do right now is to render all we need to do right now is to render the text box, image button and calendar. Okay, so let's copy paste. So instead of copy paste, I type it here. Text box dot render image button calendar okay, and we done. Okay, so very simple. We are done actually building the composite custom control here. 3 simple steps. Okay, create this project as an ASP.NET web empty application and add a server control file to this project, empty web project. To this project we need to add a file custom calendar.cs, which is a server control file, and give it a meaningful name. In our case we call it custom calendar. In our case we call it custom calendar. And then within the toolbox data, we have already custom calendar. And give our tag a meaningful name, which is already here, custom calendar, the meaningful name to our tag. And then make our class inherit from, and then make our class inherit from composite control base class, which contain all the functionality required by any ASP.NET composite control. And then whatever are going to be the child controls have declaration for them. Override, create child controls to create those child controls, and finally override the render method. That's it. In our next video sessions, we will actually discuss about using our first loading this composite custom control into a toolbox, and then dragging and dropping that custom control from the toolbox on an ASP.NET web application project and consuming it in that project. We will discuss about that in our next video session. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.